Welcome home. We are WNST. Tassel, Baltimore. Baltimore positive. We are trying to remain positive during a time where if we were taking phone calls here, this would be Baltimore negative. I promise you over 105.7, the sky is falling. But around here, Luke and I are trying to be sane, which is why we're going to get together, stay calm, and eat oysters and crab cakes. We're going to be at Fadley's on Friday. We're going to be at Costas next Friday doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. I will have the Ravens scratch-offs. I have the Gold Rush 7s double. There's a handful of these left, but the Ravens scratch-offs are now out. Our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care have raced Luke from back and forth from Camden Yards to Owings Mills. We will not be represented at Owings Mills on Thursday because Chad Steele won't allow a lifetime Hispanic reporter in to cover the team, but Luke will be at Camden Yards, where the Orioles are trying to get right. The Ravens are trying to get right. They haven't started blaming the media yet, Luke, but you're out there. You're seeing all of this. It's I don't know. I don't remember a week like this in Baltimore. I mean, I remember losing AFC Championship games. I remember losing the ALCS to the Royals back in the day. But I don't remember sort of the double whammy of 0-2 when the team's supposed to go to the Super Bowl and 8 of 10 series, and they can't get out of their own way on the baseball side. This has been a weird week to be a sports reporter and to be out on the street after so much optimism around here the last couple of years at least.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely not a difficult time if you're a Baltimore sports fan. I think that's stating the obvious. 0-2 start. Orioles, I mean, the AL East is all but shot at this point, barring a miracle. And now it's just a case of holding on to the top wild card spot. And mathematically, they're still way better than what the tone is, way better than how it feels. But it's not 100% until they
I
clinch
came this
and all
close to
that.
blowing the
So
Ravens off next week for the Bills game, and you and me up to New York. We'd start spreading the news. We'd take a bite of the Big Apple. It'll be 5 days back by the time they get there. I mean,
at least,
the
right?
way you plan this out, the Ravens are going to be at least 1-1, right? I mean, they could lose to Kansas City, but they had to beat the Raiders. I mean, both of these teams have found themselves in the weirdest of spots, and we'll get to baseball, and we'll get to pitching, and we'll get to Brandon. We'll do all of that because you're out there every night. But on the football side, we're trying to get ready for this football game. And, dude, I don't know where we are if when Sunday Night Football comes on and they're 0-3. Like that just can't happen. And they're going down to Dallas. It started as a favorite. I guess people down on Dallas based on what happened with the Saints last week and thinking, well, the Ravens have to win at some point. Some point better be Sunday at 4:30.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I mean, I was even having this conversation with a few people on social media over the last couple of days. As disappointing as an 0-2 start is, as much as you hear all the statistics, which are really skewed by the fact that a lot of terrible teams start 0-2 over the course of history. So I don't think the Ravens are a terrible team. I don't think they're anything close to that. I still think they're a really good team. Are they playing really good football at the moment? No, they're not. And we've talked about the O-line and transition from Mike McDonald to Zach Orr and all the different things that even in the offseason, and even as recently as early September, I said to you, there might be some things that are choppy early in the year. Now, I didn't pick 0-2, but I picked 1-1. So with all of that being said, I'm still fairly nonplussed about an 0-2 start, other than you need to start seeing meaningful improvement with your offensive line sooner than later. There's no doubt about that. But all their other issues, I think, are issues that will work themselves out over the course of the season, and they're still very talented. However, these next 3 games, and specifically talking about Sunday, since we're talking about a trip down to Arlington to face the Cowboys, who are coming off of a beatdown, suffering a beatdown to the upstart New Orleans Saints of all teams. 0-3 feels different. That hits different. That is when you start to, not that it's insurmountable, but I think then you start to question, okay, what's going on between the ears in addition to just what the obvious issues are on the field? What's going on in terms of the mood of the locker room? Many of the questions we're asking about the Orioles right now when you talk about how long they've struggled, but it's different when it's the start of a season, right? I mean, you go into the year and you lose to KC and you say, okay, that stinks. It stinks for morale, but it's the Chiefs, right? I mean, it's a 2-time defending Super Bowl champions. There's no shame in that. But when you lose to the Raiders, And then if you are talking about losing another game and you're 0-3 for the first time since 2015, then that's different. That's when the mental part, the emotional part, those other issues that, even as reporters privy to some locker room access, very little locker room access compared to how much time these guys actually spend together in the locker room. That's when you do start to wonder if something else is awry or something else is amiss, or
I hear that
if
about
they're
the baseball team because they're losing. Once you start losing,
sure,
questions start happening and body language starts to matter and who's pointing at who and who's disagreeing
right,
on the sidelines. I mean, they're losing 13-3 in the second quarter and somebody's in somebody's face on the sideline, which isn't that? I mean, Kelsey got in Andy Reid's face at the Super Bowl, right? And all of a sudden he's beating his girlfriend on the internet. Like, it's crazy, but emotions get real crazy if they get behind. And whatever tensions there are, I still think's the most important. I mean, the death of Joe D'Alessandro, I will continue to say that is something we're not allowed to talk about, but we're gonna talk about because I think that's an effect on this thing, on the operation of the offense, not just emotions and him being there and him being popular and him being kind and like all of that, but just there's a teaching aspect to take that wisdom. You take Mike McDonald away from the defense, and it changed. I think taking personnel away is one thing. We see that on the baseball side where they don't have the same players. But I think, this offensive line thing with the Ravens. If I were poking around out there, I would be poking around for first. Some of these guys weren't good enough. Like, we questioned that all off season. But to think that it's just going to get righted, I don't know, man. The offensive line, watching Falele, watching the breakdowns, watching Baldy break the game down on the O line, and seeing, and even having John say, like on Monday, we're inconsistent. That's a weird admission for John, I think.
I mean, I don't think it's weird. I think it's stating the obvious. I think that, some of the comments might be harsher than that, behind closed doors, or if you're talking about the truth serum, so to speak. But I mean, it needs to get better. There's no question about that. The Joe D'Alessandro aspect of this is absolutely there. I don't know if it's worth belaboring because what are you going to say? I mean, that's not something you plan for, right? That's not something you can anticipate. I mean, that's just life right there. We're not talking about football. That's life.
Dude, they
Where
buried their coach the day after they lost to the Chiefs on national TV and then came back and laid a turd against the Raiders, and the offensive line was the reason. So to me, the
there
offensive
are a lot of
line
things
is
about that. I mean, I mean,
the
the
players might not
defense,
be good enough. The players might not be good enough on the offensive line.
they might not be, but at the same time, you're also talking about a second round rookie who did look better in week 2 than he did in week 1. Andrew Voorhees, I think, is showing enough, even though in an ideal world with your offensive line, he would be probably your worst offensive lineman. And right now, he's probably their third best or fourth best. But I think he's shown enough to still warrant optimism that he's going to get better. Falele is the one that I'm just not sure about. John Harbaugh was asked about Ben Cleveland on Monday and, said that Falele beat him out. I was out there. Ben Cleveland worked at left guard and center all summer. So I don't know how much of a true competition it was. It's just clear they don't believe in him in the way that they didn't believe in Bryant McKinney for stretches of time and wanted Michael Orr to be the left tackle. But when it came time to, you know, to really settle in and have to put your best group together, they begrudgingly put Bryant McKinney at left tackle, and then they did what they did in 2012. I mean, I'm not saying it's a perfect comparison. I'm just saying it reminds me of that a little bit. Ben Cleveland.
Brian McKinney was a lottery pick that they needed to fire under his ass to get him to play. He probably could have gone to the Hall of Fame had he been as motivated and as not on the love boat as John Ogden. And he had, I mean, Brian McKinney was a beast if you could get him to play, if you could get the best out of him. I don't know that any of these guys, other than Linderbaum, have beast mode left in them. Although Ronnie Stanley's
played really well.
Yes.
Stanley's played really well. I mean, he has. I mean, now he showed up on the injury report on Wednesday. Sounds like much more of a maintenance day. I mean, John Harbaugh flat out said he's going to play Sunday. That tells me that was more rest day than anything concerning physically. I mean, I believe it's the first practice he's missed or sat out going back to OTA, maybe mandatory minicamp. So he's been very durable, and that's one reason I think we've seen a bump in his play, compared to what it's been the last 3-4 years. So, but I was just, the Ben Cleveland thing was just, it's something that it reminds me of a little bit. Ben Cleveland is in year 4. He's never made it onto the field. It's clear that they don't trust him. He's filled in on a few occasions and done reasonably well, but not saying he looked like Marshall Yanda out there filling in for Kevin Zeitler the last couple years for 3 starts over the previous 2 seasons. But with Faalele, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing enough quickness. I'm not seeing him play with enough functional playing strength for someone who's 380 pounds, where you would say, you know what? Okay, his footwork's one thing, his speed's one thing,
Should never get pushed
but he
backwards,
mauls
right?
people, right? He doesn't maul people. So we're going to see. But absolutely the Joe D element here. And I say that with no disrespect to George Warhop, who they brought in to replace him. Go look at his resume. He's coached offensive line in the NFL for a very long time. It's not like they just promoted their assistant line coach who's 3 years out of being a graduate assistant at Colorado State or something like that. I mean, this is an accomplished replacement, but it takes time. It takes time to come in, and you're trying to swim upstream with the work that these guys have put in for months, and in some cases, the institutional knowledge that some of these veteran offensive linemen have had for years under Joe D. So it's part of it. It's like I said to you, talking about the defense and other issues with the offense or the special teams, all of those things, I still feel very confident that they're going to get worked out. I said to you over and over, with Zach Orr, that it might be a little choppy. It was with Mike McDonald 2 years ago when he took over. And Mike McDonald had the apprenticeship at Michigan for a year. Zach Orr's never called plays as a defensive coordinator at any level prior to this year. So I think it's important in the same way that you would look at a rookie quarterback or anyone that's a first-time starter as a player to offer some patience. Now, doesn't mean how they've played has been acceptable, but in terms of trying to project it out, in terms of looking at a trajectory for a coach, I think you need to think about that in the same way. So again, that's where I'm not long-term, I'm not as concerned about, but the O-line, yeah. And lo and behold, I mean, you're talking about another defense that, while they got gashed last week by the Saints and got embarrassed by the Saints playing at home, they still have Micah Parsons. They still have, DeMarcus Lawrence may not be what he was a few years ago, but they've got players who can play. I mean, it's maybe an overall defense, an overall roster, I'd say, for Dallas, probably not where it was a couple years ago. They've had some attrition, but it's still a team that you have to go down there and got to play good football, and you've got to block, and you've got to be more consistent in everything you do. I mean, John Harbaugh used that term consistency. He didn't say that just about the offensive line. He used that term consistency. I saw one of the other reporters, I can't remember the exact count, but it was up in the teens, the number of times he mentioned that, just talking about various elements of the football team. So they're absolutely a submergency. And again, I'm sitting here saying I'm not pressing the panic button over 0-2, but you fought 0-3, boy, I'm reaching for it, because again, that's when, to me, the mental part of this really starts to set in. Some of those intangibles start to set in as far as questions about that stuff, not just strictly what's happening on the field.
Well, 2-3 would be an upshot 3 weeks from now. If they win 2 of these 3 games,
Games, I mean, they're fine.
2-3. So 2-3 is still a mess in early October, but it's navigable if you can start to chunk some wins together when the schedule gets a little softer. But It felt softer last week when the Raiders came to Baltimore as 10-point underdogs, and this feels not soft at all, going to Dallas, going to Cincinnati in 2 weeks. It feels like this is a first-place schedule, and every week's going to be a prize fight for Lamar.
Yeah, it is. At the same time, I mean, if you want to look at it through the more positive lens, they were a toenail away from potentially having a chance to win in Kansas City. I mean, that's how close it was there. And Vegas, I mean, make one play. If one phase of the game makes a play in the final 11 minutes of that football game, including Jordan Stout not shanking a punt, if he hits a 55-yard boomer, maybe the defense makes a stop. Maybe the defense picks off Gardner Minshew on their second play of that final drive. No one made a play. And they lost by a field goal. So that's where you have to, I think that's where you lean on experience with okay, 5 years ago, this was a young team. Now, not so much. I mean, Lamar Jackson's in year 7. Mark Andrews is in year 7. Marlon Humphrey's in year 8. I mean, go down the list of the guys that in 2019, when they went on their amazing 14-2 run, they were very young at that point in time. Marshall Yanda and a bunch of kids, basically. A couple other guys as
Hall
well.
of Fame eligible Marshall Yanda?
And Terrell Suggs as well. Yeah, well, we'll see. I still don't know if either one of those guys will end up being first-year ballots, but we'll have another time. We'll have another discussion
I
about
don't
that at
think
some
either
point.
one of them are first ballot Hall of Fame. I mean, I thought John says a lot of stuff that
he's
it's
gonna
probably why they threw me out as I waved my hand at him and say,
any coach is going to say that,
stop,
Nestor. Come on,
stop.
any coach is
You
going to
say he's a Hall of Famer, but you don't say first ballot because it's not
what
true.
what. Well, see right there. You're making an assumption. I'm not convinced of that.
I think Yanda might be, Suggs will not be.
Okay. I mean, okay. I I I tend to probably agree with you. I don't think that's fait accompli to criticize a head coach.
What year is this right now? Is this 20? This is 24, right? Wake me in 27. Yanda will be in. Suggs will be waiting.
Okay.
Now, that's what I'm saying. That's
okay.
That's your opinion. Long enough to go on that. I've been in the room with those guys, and I know who gets in line, and I don't even care who they are. I look at them and say, there's already 15 guys that they threw out last year because I have Howard Balzer and I have Clark. I have all the voters. I know all these people other than Tony Grossi. I know him a little bit. But John McClain, all these people that vote, they just don't. Peyton Manning gets in for Eli Manning won't get in first time.
I don't know if Eli Manning
will ever get in. Right.
I mean, he won 2 Super. Let's go back to
okay. Fair enough.
This is not a great topic for late in game
week
of an 0-2
That's our Fadley's topic on Friday. I just came up with that. That's
okay. Okay.
I don't know.
I don't know.
You talk enough sports. You don't need to talk sports you don't want to talk.
Well, I mean, I just
they're 0-2. Forget Marshall Yanda. It's 2019.
Right. Hall of Fame voting's 5 months away.
I'm trying to make you forget they're 0-2. Is all.
Yeah, but no, I think going back to the point and now I'm starting to lost my train of thought. Talking about a veteran team and dealing with 0-2 and being in a unique space here. I mean, losing back-to-back games with a healthy Lamar Jackson as the starting quarterback is rare territory. That's only happened a few times. I mean, that speaks to how great they've been in the regular season when he's been healthy and upright. So when you start 0-2, and now if you even want to count the playoff game at the end of last year, you've lost 3 straight meaningful games. That's where you do need to lean on experience, and you do need to lean on guys who've been there before, even someone like a Kyle Van Noy who's been there before elsewhere and been through some tough times elsewhere and also been to the top of the mountain elsewhere. But I think this is where you have to really understand and recognize you cannot win 2 games on Sunday. You cannot win 3 games on Sunday to suddenly be 3-0 as opposed to going into the day 0-2. You really, truly do have to compartmentalize. As cliche as it sounds, and I roll my eyes hearing these kind of things because we all hear them all the time, but you do have to compartmentalize and truly make it one play at a time, 1 quarter at a time, 1 drive at a time, 1 quarter at a time, 1 half at a time, 1 game at a time when you start 0-2. Because again, you can't make it back in the same way that we've been talking about this for weeks now about the Orioles offense. You've been scuffling. If you're Adley Rutschman, just for one example, you've been worse than scuffling. You've been playing bad since July. You can't make that all up with 1 swing. You can't make that all up with, you can't hit a 5-run home run with the bases empty. I mean, there's just no such thing. You can only handle the task that's presented to you. And that's where I think this team just needs to say, hey, let's go to Dallas. Cowboys are good, but they're not, I'm not even convinced they're good. Let's be clear, but they've been to the playoffs. They're a team that has been really good. You have to go down there and play good football. And Dallas is kind of saying the same thing. They can't erase what happened against the Saints last week, but hey, the Ravens are coming to town and they look a little more vulnerable maybe than they've been in recent years when Lamar's been healthy. So, I think it's on paper, there's nothing about Dallas that terrifies me or really makes me say, oh my gosh, other than Micah Parsons. And that's where we go back to the offensive line discussion. I say that with no disrespect to CeeDee Lamb. I mean, he's a great wide receiver, but I mean, the Ravens, they let Devontae Adams do things to them late in the game, but that's not the only reason why they lost. So, I mean, you just need to go down there and handle business. It's not that complicated. This is a team that's won a ton of football games. This is a team that had a chance to win both of these games to start the year. In the case of Vegas, they should have won that game. I mean, my goodness. I mean, I saw Aaron Schatz, with talking about DVOA and post-game win probability and everything. I think he said that the way that game played out, the Ravens would be a winner 95% of the time, just looking at the stats and the game flow and all the different things that happened. So it was a weird, fluky kind of way of losing, but unfortunately the Ravens have made that a part of their identity the last few years. So, I don't have, this magical breakdown about what needs to happen. I think this team just needs to go out there and play good football. And it's a Dallas team that has not stopped the run very well. You want to try to get your run game going. I think that's easier said than done when you're talking about the Ravens and their difficulty blocking between the tackles, but get Derrick Henry to the edge. They were able to do that a few times against the Raiders, and it worked beautifully then. Now it needs to be more consistent. In the case of Lamar Jackson, I mean, Lamar hasn't played bad football these first two games. Has he played his absolute best MVP level football? No, not yet. But they need MVP Lamar over these next three games. You need your best player to rise to the occasion here. And again, it's easier said than done if you're running for your life. And a lot of people pointed to the misfire he had to a wide open Mark Andrews against the Raiders. He was feeling pressure there that wasn't there. But that's what happens when you're not controlling the pocket, and when you're in a position where your quarterback is feeling heat too frequently, then they start to feel it even when it's not there. We talked about this a decade ago with Joe Flacco at a time when the Ravens offensive line was diminished and what that did to him. It happens to a lot of quarterbacks. There's the famous Sam Darnold seeing ghost line, from several years back, although Sam Darnold playing much better football in Minnesota. But I mean, they just need to go down to Dallas and play like they're capable of playing, but they've got to do it for 60 minutes. I mean, this isn't I don't think they're a bad football team. I still think they're a really good football team, but you got to go prove it. You've got to go show it. I mean, Odafe Owe kind of said that they've got to take their pride back. He kind of offered a good quote there. I mean, he wasn't pressing the panic button, but he acknowledged that their pride's wounded right now. They've kind of been, their lips been bloodied a little bit here over these first couple games. They're not used to being 0-2. I mean, this is very weird territory for this generation of Ravens players. So, but it's nothing complex. Again, there's no 3-win play. You just have to go out there and win every play, or win as many plays as you can.
And they would be a very impressive team if they're 3-2. If they come back from Cincinnati and they're 3-2, oh my God! Even if the Orioles are eliminated by then, which they probably will be, that would be something. Because I'm giving them 2-3 as a ceiling. I'm giving them 1-4 as a warning shot, and I'm giving them 0-3 as big problems on Monday morning if they're 0-3.
Yeah, no question. I would agree with that. I
don't know many places they could go in the league that would be harder to win. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, what would be a harder game this week? Going to Buffalo, maybe? I don't know. Where else could they go where you'd say, oh my God, it's a tough game? They have to go out and play Harbaugh's brother later in the year. I mean, there are games on the schedule that I looked at the Chargers and thought, well, what's that? The Chargers might be 8-1 by the time they get there. You know what I mean? Like, I start to see who was good last year, who was good this year. They better win on Sunday. I mean, 0-3 around here would be a different kind of floor, right? Something something we haven't seen around here. And it's amazing to me they started the week as favorites. I mean, I don't not that I'm supposed to understand the Vegas thing, but loving the Ravens on the road, loving them on the road and an NFC place where there's history and they beat these NFC teams because they can't prepare for Lamar. So there's some juice to think that you put $1 on Lamar this week and the Ravens need to win, that John Harbaugh's not going 0-3, Lamar's not going 0. So if you feel all of that, then, go take that's why people bet on the games, I guess.
Yeah, and if you look at, not that I'm, me, I'm not a big sports gambling guy or, pay too much attention to it, but I have noticed, I mean, the Ravens are still regarded as the favorite to win the division. Despite Pittsburgh being 2-0, despite anything you want to look at, they're
Well, if they're
still,
good enough, they can make the Pittsburgh games up. They play them twice. If they're good
well,
enough.
right, but my point is they're still very highly regarded, and again, this Dallas team was kind of perceived as being a team that could take a step back. I mean, they're lots of questions about the future of the head coach there, with Mike McCarthy. I mean, I think that's obvious. I think it was, there were big questions last January when they laid the egg that they did in January. I mean, they are, I've used this comparison with you before, and Ravens fans won't like it, but, these teams, they're not identical. Let me be very clear about that. But they've kind of had some of the same issues in terms of having some really impressive regular seasons, and then it doesn't show up in January. Now, I think the Cowboys have been less impressive in the regular season than the Ravens have been overall over the last 5 or 6 years. And I think their struggles in January have been magnified. And my goodness, it goes back 3 decades for them at this point.
They also get blown out. That's the thing about Harbaugh, that if I were ever making
Right.
his Hall of Fame thing, there have been very few weeks where the Ravens roll the ball out and lose 41-19.
Well, and that's what I've kind of talked about with this whole thing about they blow these fourth quarter leads. I mean, when you consider what their overall record is relative to acknowledging that, yeah, they've had what I think 9 games over the last 2+ seasons now that they've either led by more than one score or they've had a fourth quarter lead and they've lost those games. But you're talking about 9 games, and then you throw in what, one or two others in that mix over 3 years. If they just lost those games in conventional ways, like they lost by 10 points or 13 points or an occasional blowout, we won't even talk about that. So there
Well,
is
they're
something.
impressive enough to have a lead every
Right.
week. I mean, last year, what did they play? 12 minutes the whole year behind or something? It was
I mean, it
crazy.
was crazy. Right. I mean, exactly. I know Sharp Football had the stat, I included it and linked to it in my 12 thoughts talking about the Kansas City game. The Ravens trailed for as many plays in the second half in that opener. It was like already over a majority of compared to the total number they had trailing in the second half last year. I mean, that's what you're talking about. I mean, such strange territory. I mean, the Vegas game, they didn't trail until the very end, right? I mean, it was either tied or they had the lead for the entire day until the last minute there.
I think
So,
that was the weird part about the playoff game against Kansas City last year is they were playing from behind,
right,
and they played from behind last week. They don't play from behind
sure.
much, if ever.
Yeah, so that's where you look at it, and you can look at it one of two ways. You could say, okay, well, maybe this team isn't as good, or you look at it and say it's Kansas City, and they've still, no matter how these next 15 weeks play out in terms of assuming they play well enough that they're playing in January, which I still fully expect that. If they lose Sunday, then I start to waver at least a little bit on that one, sure. But point is, they'll still have to try to figure out a way to beat Kansas City if they want to get to where they want to go. But that's a long ways away. Again, you can't make all this up. There's no 3-win play to suddenly make yourselves 3-0 on Sunday. Get a win. 1-2 is fine, right? I mean, that's the number of teams that have been 1-2 to then go on and do special things. You'll find plenty. I mean, that's not it's not that strange. It's not that insurmountable by any means. But yeah, if it's 0-3 and if you go down there and Dak Prescott chucks the ball all over the place against your secondary that has been very Jekyll and Hyde. I mean, I mentioned this to you, but I mean, how about the fact that this team's last in pass defense right now? I mean, it's very surprising. They've got to clean up that middle intermediate portion of the field. I mean, there's no excuse when you have Kyle Hamilton, Marcus Williams, and Roquan Smith. You shouldn't have teams that are constantly making plays in that portion of the field against you. I mean, okay, Kansas City's one thing, but the Raiders, I mean, Brock Bowers, who made some great contested catches. Don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about all of those plays, because sometimes the other team, you just chalk it up to the other team trying to. But when you're talking about some of these plays where guys have been wide open or guys are slow to react in coverage, zone coverage, or not closing in fast enough on some of these windows. So they've got to fix that. But at the same time, this is a Dallas team. I really, if there's one thing you could say about the defense so far, No one's run on them. I mean, Kansas City didn't run on them. The Raiders running game was a joke last week. I mean, they got to the point where they just gave it up. They had one decent run on that final drive, but they did nothing in that regard. And I mean, I think this is one of those things where it's funny because I was the guy, of course, that wasn't over the moon about the Derrick Henry signing for a variety of reasons, and we talked about that. But at the same time, that doesn't mean you go back in time and you're doing what Dallas has done, which is bring back Zeke Elliott. Like that's supposed to be a thing in 2024. I mean, really? I mean, it's not 2018. Like, I mean, their backfield. Yes, there are philosophies to not pay running backs, but that doesn't mean you just bring back a washed up running back. And I mean, that's what it is. So I really doubt their ability to run the ball with any level of effectiveness, any level of consistency. And I think that's just going to make things that much more difficult for Dak Prescott. I mean, as much as Dak Prescott is a very good quarterback and obviously just got a big contract, there was another offseason distraction. I mean, for them, CD Lamb, Dak Prescott, what's going to happen with Michael Parsons down the line? But
Dak gets all the commercials. Lamar doesn't, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, Dak Prescott is one of those guys that, he needs enough around him, right? There are very few quarterbacks that can go into the phone booth. Lamar is a phone booth quarterback. Right now, it's not done in the same conventional way as other quarterbacks that you would say that about. But Dak Prescott's, I don't think, is the guy that can do that, right? I think he's the kind of guy that if everything else around him is kind of breaking down, it tends to go poorly for him. And
well, he's got to distribute the ball. Lamar doesn't have to. Lamar can eat the ball and take off. Yeah.
Lamar can literally do it by himself sometimes. You don't want him to. Again, I agree. You don't want him to be taking, 18 rushes and 18 hits, but he can do that.
Are you telling Superman not to fly?
No, I'm saying not to do it that much. It's insane to tell him not to do it at all or to do it so little. But
I'm going to be using that all year, by the way. Superman telling him not to fly when Lamar runs 214 times this year.
Look, I'm telling you, it's what makes him transcendent. He's the greatest rushing quarterback.
That's why they pay him $50 million. They don't pay him $50 million to throw the ball.
No, they pay him to do both. But yeah, but with Dak Prescott, it's when other things are breaking down around him, he looks very average.
Pedestrian. Yeah, I would say.
Yeah. I mean,
he's prone to throwing the Ravens too this week. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, especially, we've talked a lot about the Lamar against an NFC opponent thing, but, one thing that I'd like to see the Ravens do, and, this is challenging because, again, I've been the guy talking about, okay, this thing isn't going to be fully calibrated pre-snap with the things that they like to do defensively under Zach Orr to the degree that it was under Mike Macdonald as time went on. But they haven't really been all that aggressive. They haven't blitzed that much. I mean, look, Owe and Van Noy had really good games. Travis Jones had a really good game. Their pass rush was a little more Jekyll and Hyde than I would have liked against the Raiders. I think it was really good for large stretches of the game. Obviously, they had 5 sacks. I mean, I'm not sitting here saying the pass rush was bad, but I also thought there were some crucial moments where maybe they needed to put their foot on the gas a little more in terms of being aggressive, maybe trying to really get, Gardner Minshew out of whack. I think you could have an opportunity to do some of those things against Dak Prescott as well. And I'm not saying you blitz every play. Let's be clear about that. But it's been a little more conservative on that front than I would have thought. So, maybe we see the Ravens change up some early season tendencies in that regard to really try to get Dak Prescott out of sorts. But again, we can talk about all these different elements and beginning with the offensive line, but you got to go out and win one-on-one matchups. You got to go out and fulfill your assignment as an individual player and then as a unit and not commit as many penalties, and I'm not even talking about the questionable ones. They've had too many penalties, period, including pre-snap. I mean, as much as I didn't love the tush-push play call to Charlie Kohler on 3rd and 1 late in the game, Derrick Henry can't jump there. I mean, you can't have those things. Veteran player or rookie, you can't have those things. That kills your operation when you're searching for consistency. Very few teams are going to be good enough to overcome those things. So you look at this team, defensively, they're last in pass defense, they're first in run defense. And we saw what they did to the Raiders in the first half on Sunday. And offensively, as much talk as there's been about the offensive line, they've moved the heck out of the ball. They're first in the league in yards. They're fourth in rushing yards, albeit a lot of that being Lamar scrambling in week 1, right? Pass offense, they're fourth in passing yards. It's not as though they are not moving the ball, but you've got to be more consistent in terms of being efficient, converting on third downs, converting in the red zone, not committing penalties to put you behind the chains. Those little things really start to add up and become big things for you and wipe out what have been some good things otherwise. So, how about cleaner football, fewer mistakes, that kind of football? I don't need to see the spectacular chunk plays, although those are nice and you want to have those, but just let's start seeing a cleaner operation, on both sides in terms of fewer penalties, clock management, having some timeouts. I mean, and a lot of that's coaching what I'm mentioning here. No one's absolved from this when you're 0-2, but I think so much of this is just go out and play the way you're capable of, but you got to do it for 60 minutes. It's not that complicated. We try to make it really complicated, and then you kind of take a step back and say, just go play. You guys are really good. Even with some of the losses they sustained in the offseason, they're really good at just about every position group on the field, other than the offensive line's really dicey right now, at least at a couple spots. But otherwise, I still think this is a heck of a football team. But 0-2 is 0-2, and you got to go out there and win games. And it starts with handling, going out there and handling a Dallas team that I don't think is as good as it was talent-wise a couple years ago, but is still a team that has expectations. Still, to your point, a challenging place to play. Not the most challenging in the league, but a challenging place to play. And got to go out and play 60 minutes. They played 52 minutes on Sunday, or 50 minutes on Sunday, and we saw what ended up happening at the end. So you got to go out and play a more complete football game, or we will be talking at 0-3, and the tone will be drastically different at that point. That's when, to me, you really start to question what exactly is going on. If you're coming back to Baltimore and you and I are reconvening early Monday morning talking about an 0-3 football team, but I'm not going to give you my prediction just yet, but I think this team is going to rise to the occasion, understanding where they are and understanding where they can't afford to be come Monday morning.
Last thing for you is on the injury front, just that they're pretty healthy. Like, you know what I mean? Like against the grain of the last 5 years, going back before the plague, they've managed, at least through training camp. I mean, remember a couple years ago, they lose Dobbins. They lost key people. They're at least going out and playing with their football team right now.
Yeah, I mean, they're a little banged up right now. I mean, keep an eye on Kyle Hamilton. There were a couple moments during Sunday's game, and he's off to a slow start. I mean, we talked about this more so in week 1, where he and Roquan Smith just played maybe their worst game, when you talk about those two guys together. He was not as, I don't think he was as bad Tuesday, week 2, but still didn't look fully himself. He's listed on the injury report, missed Wednesday's practice with a back issue. I don't think it's going to keep him out of the game, but he's a little banged up, and he was a little banged up during training camp. I mean, that's the one thing with even the best of players. If you're dealing with some physical issues even early in the season, that's where you get a little more concerned, because it's like, okay, is this something that's going to linger? But, other than him, I mentioned Ronnie Stanley got a day on Wednesday. John Harbaugh already said he's going to play. We'll see about Nate Wiggins. I don't know if you and I have even brought it up, but, he was involved in a car accident last week and missed Sunday's game. I'd like to get Nate Wiggins back on the field and involved in this. Nothing against Marlon Humphrey and Brandon Stevens, but this kid's a first-round talent that has insane speed. You'd like to have him on the field, matching up against some of these speedier wide receivers that they're going to see here over the next few weeks. You'd like to get him integrated into what they do defensively a little bit more. I'm not saying he's going to take someone's starting job, but I think he can be into that rotation. But, Van Noy with the eye, you're right. I mean, and I think for me, more specifically, that's where the concerns for the offensive line persist, because this is their group, right? I mean, this is their group with the healthiest Ronnie Stanley we've seen in 4 years, Nestor, at least at the moment. You hope it continues that way. So I mean, these are their guys. This isn't a case where their offensive line's diminished because they lost two guys to multi-week injuries in training camp. So yeah, but overall they are relatively healthy. Guys on the injury report this week, but the early indications are not guys that are, other than Wiggins, that are going to miss the game. And we'll see about Wiggins over the course of the week. I saw him in the locker room on Wednesday, so it's not as though he's in a dark room dealing with really bad concussion symptoms or laid up in a neck brace or anything like that after his car accident. But he's sore. I mean that happens. Anyone who's been involved in a car accident can attest to something like that, even if it's a relatively minor one. So, but they are pretty healthy, and they're going to need all their guys, because even though I'm confident in this team going out to Arlington and playing well and doing what they need to do on the road, this is not a layup game by any stretch of the imagination. To your point, the sports books are giving them a lot of respect here going on the road, but at the same time, they gave them a lot of respect last week against the Raiders. They were 8.5-point favorites, 9-point favorites, whatever it ended up being, depending on which site you look to, and they lost. So, to borrow an expression from the team that they just lost to last week, just win, baby. I mean, it's really is that simple for this team this week, and you just need to go out there and play a cleaner, more complete football game, and they do that. I think they have a heck of a chance to win on the road against a Cowboys team that I think has some pretty definitive weaknesses. I mean, they haven't really been all that good on either side of the ball over these first two games. Against Cleveland, yes, certainly not against the Saints, where they were embarrassed. So that's a team that's going to be plenty motivated. But hey, you're 0-2. If you're not motivated, if I'm questioning whether the other team's more motivated than you, then they've got way bigger problems than just 0-2. And so that's where, again, I expect this team to be ready to play come Sunday afternoon.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke. He's out on all the social medias. He's heading from Owings Mills to Camden Yards to Owings Mills, and not to Dallas, but we will be monitoring all things in the afternoon on Dallas. Luke will be at the ballpark with Brandon Hyde and with the second-place Orioles, who are headed to New York next week. Lots of things going on around here, including Friday. We're going to be at Fadley's Lexington Market doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour, presented by the Maryland Lottery in conjunction with our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions, putting us on the road for our Oyster Tour. 1-800-CLEAN-WATER. If you have well water, if you need clean water, they take great care of me. They can take great care of you. They're up in northern Baltimore County. Work the whole area, including plumbers at Liberty Pure Solutions. Jiffy Lube, Multi-Care, puts Luke out on the road, gets him back and forth from Camden Yards to Owings Mills and back to his palatial estate in Pennsylvania. By the way, happy birthday to your brother here this week. Your birthday's coming up. My birthday's coming up. We're going to be doing the show at Costas next Friday on the 27th in Dundalk. We'll be giving away Maryland Lottery scratch-offs. And then on the 11th of October, the mutual birthday of Luke and I, somewhere in the middle. And my love to Jim Palmer. Happy birthday to him and Sammy Hagar. October 11th, it's a Friday. We'll be at Pizza John's in Essex doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour and talking pizza, my favorite pizza, which is the Hawaiian pizza with pepperoni. I'll feature that on the show that day. I know if you don't like pineapple, shame on you, but that's okay. I like pineapple, and I'll have pineapple on my damn pizza anytime I feel like it at Pizza John's. Orioles are struggling. Ravens are struggling. And we're going to try to come back next week and have better radio here, have happier times. He's Luke. I'm Nestor. We're WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.